hot reload should kick in, and perfect. We can see both the coupon. And with that, our coupon index is looking great. Next thing that we want to work on is creating a new coupon. We will go back here, and if I scroll up, we have the anchor tag right here. We need to create an action method in the coupon controller. Let me close the coupon API and everything else. It gets confusing super quick. So make sure to keep your tab up here, super simple. We will add a public async action method that will be task of I action result. Name of the method to create a coupon. I will go with the model name, which is coupon, and what is the method responsible for? That is create. By default, in the get endpoint, we will return back to the view and keep things super simple. We need to add this view, stop the application, right click, whoops, add view, empty view, name will be coupon create. Perfect. If we go back to our snippet, we have the coupon create view. Copy that and paste it right here. Now what will be the model of this view? From the controller, we are not passing anything, but we know we will be creating one coupon. So right here, the model will be coupon DTO itself. We will be working with only one coupon, so we do not have an IEnumerable there. After that, let me modify the view here. Let me run the application to see how that looks. When I go back, coupon, if I click create new coupon, I need to redirect there. So right here, we will add the ASP action, and that is coupon create. I am not adding the controller name because we are in the same controller. Hot reload should have kicked in, and yes, it did. We have the create coupon, and that looks good. We have a padding here, but that will be used for label that we have right here. First one, let me display coupon code. Scroll down. We have the discount amount, and we have the minimum amount. If I save that, whoops, I have a spelling mistake there. Perfect, that looks good. For validation, we will be using validation scripts partial. That is right here. We have the jQuery validation. We will scroll down at the end here, add a section script, and we will use the partial tag with validation scripts partial. Make sure the name is exactly the same, or else it won't work. Then let me go back up here where we have the input. Let me add ASP for. This one is for coupon code. That looks good. And then let me add a span for validation. ASP validation for will be coupon code. Class will be text danger. I will copy both of them and let me paste it in the other two places. We have the discount amount. Copy that. And we have the minimum amount. Copy and paste that. Perfect. Let me save that. And if we go back, hit the create button. Perfect. We have the validation. Our view is looking great for create coupon. Back to list is not functional. Where we have that, we want to go back to the action, which was coupon index. If I save that, perfect, it is functional. In the next video, let me work on what should happen when we populate fields here. It's a number and hit the create button. We need to post our form. What I can do is in the form here, I can define ASP action will be coupon create. That is where we want to post the form. We need to work on the post action method for coupon create. Copy the get action, paste that one more time here. This will be HTTP post. When we are posting, we will receive a coupon DTO. We can call that model, that's also fine. First, what we have to check if model state dot is valid. We have the client-side validation right here, but we should also validate on server side that all of the default validations are good. If they are, then on the coupon service, we have the create coupon async that we need to invoke. Let me copy this, paste it here. Method that we want to invoke is create coupon async, and we need to pass our model. If that is successful, we can redirect them back to the index action. Rather than magic string here, let me use the name of coupon index. And if the model state is not valid, let me return back to the view with the model. With that, let me save all the pages here, go back, and let me try to create. Great, it redirects us back to the index and coupon was actually created successfully. And if I switch to SQL Server, Mango coupon, let me see, we should have 3 records. Great. With that, create functionality is looking great. Next thing we want to work is on the delete functionality. When we work on the delete functionality, we need to pass what particular coupon user wants to delete. So the route will be something like coupon delete and then maybe the ID like 12, 2 or whatever it is. Let me go back to the application in the controller here, copy this coupon create, paste that again, rename the action method to be coupon delete. In the parameter here, we will receive the coupon ID. Now how do we pass this coupon ID from the coupon index where we have the delete icon? Well, in the anchor tag here, we will define the ASP action, and that let me copy the name coupon delete, paste it there. When we are calling this, we want to pass the coupon ID. For that, we will be using ASP route tag helper. With that, we can give it any name. The variable name that we expect here is coupon ID, so that is what we will write right here. And that ID is inside item dot coupon ID. With that, let me copy this, add a debugging point here, save all of that. If I hit the delete icon, perfect, we get the coupon ID. We do not have the view, so let me add that. But before we do that, when we are loading the view to delete a coupon, we need to display all the coupon details. And for that, we will have to get coupon by the coupon ID. We go up here. Well, I can copy this right here. Not this. Let me copy where we are deserializing the object. Paste that here. And the method name will be getCoupon by ID async. We need to pass the coupon ID there. If we do get a response back, we will deserialize that, but this time it will be of the type coupon DTO. Let me call that coupon DTO. Call that as model, and if we retrieve that, we will return back to the view with that model. If we do not get anything back, we need to return a not found. You can have a 404 view and return that, but we will keep things super simple for now. Let me copy the action method name and create that view. I will stop the application, empty view here. Now this view will be exactly same as coupon create. I can copy everything, paste it Right here, model will be the same. Change that to be delete coupon, and the action name will be coupon delete. We do not want any validation here, and all the fields will be disabled. Let me add that. Back to list looks good. Here it will be delete. We can display BT and danger. Perfect, we do not want any validation. And that looks good. One thing that you can add here is in the input tag ASP4, we can have the coupon ID as the hidden property. Perfect, I believe that looks good. Let me run the application and see if everything is functional. We go back to the coupon, try to delete this one, and great, that looks good. Now we need to work on the delete action method. Copy this, paste it one more time here. This will be HTTP post here, and we will get a coupon DTO. When we are deleting, we have delete coupon async. That time we only need the coupon ID. So let me pass coupon DTO. Dot, we have the coupon ID there. If that is successful, we can redirect back to the index action method. Copy that line, paste it here. If that is not successful, we can return back to the view with the model, which is coupon DTO. With that, I believe everything should be functional. Let me hit the delete button, and for some reason it is redirecting me back, and you can see it is not working. Now we need to debug and find out what is going on. When we are trying to delete a coupon, it is not working. Before we debug that together, I want you guys to give that a try and see if you can figure out why that is not working. I hope you were able to figure that out, but if not, let me do that together. Whenever something is failing, rather than adding a debugger here, I will add that in the base service. That is where all the magic happens. We have the switch case here. Let me add it there. Try delete, and let me press F10. This is the get, that is okay. We hit the delete icon. It should go to HTTP delete. That looks good. Let me examine the response. Well, we have method not allowed. You can see the URL it is going to is API, coupon, and then the ID. Let me see what we have in the coupon API controller. We scroll down to the delete. We have the ID, but we do not have the ID in the route. That is why it will not work. Right here we need to define that, hey, there will be an ID in the route, and that is of type integer. With that saved, let me remove the debugging point here, continue, and it deleted automatically thanks to hot reload. Let me try one more, and if we delete that, perfect, you can see that is functional now. With that, the CRUD operation are functional with coupon, but I have not implemented the update functionality. If you want, you can implement the update functionality. It will be straightforward, but I do not want to do that right now, and in the later videos, you will understand why I did not add the update functionality for coupon. Right now, what we have for our coupon is looking great. Before I end the section here, I want to implement Toaster in my web project. Toaster, if we scroll down here in the demo, you can see it displays a nice Toaster notification. I want to add Toaster if something fails or if something is successful. Adding that is super simple. We need to add the CDN. So let me copy that, go back to my project here, and let me close all the tabs. We will do that in underscore layout in the web project. I copied the JS first. I will add that right here. Script src, paste that here. And let me scroll up. Next, I will be adding the link, rel, style sheet, href. Let me copy that. And I will paste it. Perfect. Toaster has been configured. Then rather than adding all the toaster notification in individual places, let me do that in a main underscore layout. I will create a new partial view. Whoops, not what I wanted. Let me go back and bring that back to what it was. In the shared folder, stop the application. I need to add a view. I can copy the validation scripts partial, paste that again. I will rename that to be underscore notifications. For notification, I like to use temp data. Temp data is something where you assign a value and that only stays for one request. To show you an example here, if we go to coupon controller, here the response is successful. In the else part, that means the response was not successful. For that, we can add temp data here. In success, well, this will be of error type. And there we need to display the message. We have that in response.message. We can use that. Let me add a null check here. And I will copy this else condition, paste it in the other places. Perfect. So if the response is not successful, we will assign the message in temp data of error. In here we can check if that is not null, then we can display toaster notification. We will add the if condition and we can check temp data in the view as well. Let me check the error here. If that is not null, then we will need jQuery and toaster.js before we display the toaster notification. jQuery is already included in your project, so you can add that here. And then where we added the toaster, let me cut that and move that right here. We will add a section for script here. Type will be text, JavaScript, the default one. Add the closing script. And within there, we have toaster notification. Let me go back and see the usage right here. Copy that, paste it here. We have the error one, and we need the message here. That message is inside temp data with the key of error. Let me copy this, paste it one more time. If temp data of success has some value, we will display that right here with success. That looks good. In order to test that, where we have the coupon API, I can change the route here to something else and let me see what happens. We will go to coupon. That did not work. Let me see why. In the coupon controller, where we have the coupon index, let me debug that. It did set the temp data. Whoops, I think I know why it did not work. We added the underscore notification, but we did not add that in underscore layout. Where we have the render body, we need to add that partial view. Name is equal to underscore notification. That way on all the pages, we will have support for toaster. With that configured, let's go back and whoops, refresh is not working. Let me restart. and it will be notifications. I noticed we have plural here. Let me make sure the spelling. Yep, that looks good. I need to save everything here, go back, coupon, and it still does not work. If I press F12 here, we have the toaster is not defined, and that should not be the case. Let me go back here. Whoops, they have an invalid JS there. We can go to CDN.js directly and try to find out the toaster. There we go. Copy that script tag. And we need to paste that right here in both the places. That was odd that on toaster.js, they had the invalid CDN. But with that, let me go back to the web project, refresh, and great. We see the not found toaster, and that is looking perfect. So with that, we have configured toaster in our application. But before you forget, make sure to go back and change your route back. You can also add more toaster where you have the success route. Like, let me copy this. In coupon create HTTP post, we can set temp data of success here. Coupon created successfully. Copy that for delete. And coupon deleted successfully. Let me see if that works. We will try to create a new coupon. Well, we already have one. Let me try to delete. And great. Our toaster notifications are working as expected. We have Coupon API and that is working as expected. When we think about a microservice architecture, we need some kind of authentication to make our API endpoint secure, and only the allowed user with correct credentials can access our API endpoints. And for that security, we will be using .NET Identity, and we will create a new API in our solution. Let me close all the tabs here. In solution, where we have our services, let me right click, add a new project. It will be an API here. I will call that mango.services.auth API. Let me create that. Perfect, our project has been created, but before we do anything here, we need to install NuGet packages because we need the .NET Identity and authentication packages. What I will do is we have few packages that we have installed in the Coupon API. We can right click there, select the edit project file, copy all the packages from there, and we can paste it in the project file of auth API. Remove this and paste all the packages. Perfect. That way, if we examine the dependencies, we have all the basic packages with Entity Framework Core and AutoMapper in the auth API. If we examine the .NET Identity, we are using the port number 7002 in our architecture. Let me add that in our project as well. We go back here, auth API, launch settings.json, and rather than 7015, we want 7002. Perfect, that looks good. Now the .NET Identity is a package that will create all the identity related tables automatically with Entity Framework Core. But for that we need to set up Entity Framework Core and DB context in our project. For that we need the app.db context, and we can copy that data folder, paste that in the auth API to save some time. You will have to open the app.db context and we will change the namespace here. This will be auth API and not the Coupon API. We do not need anything with the coupons here. Let me remove all of that here. And perfect. Now typically when you are working with Entity Framework Core, we only needed the DB context. But here we will be using .NET Identity. In order to use identity for authentication and authorization, you will have to implement from something called as identity DB context. If you press Ctrl-, we have to install the NuGet package of Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.identity.Entity Framework Core. That package has been installed, but if you right-click here, Manage NuGet Packages, I do not believe it will be .NET 8. I was correct. We will select Include Pre-release and update that to be the same version. Perfect, that looks good. Inside the AppDB context where we added the identity DB context, we can define the duser right here. You can also see the default user is identity user. So let me write that for now. Perfect, that looks good. Next thing that we have to do is configure program.cs file. Let me copy that from Coupon API to save some time there. We do not want AutoMapper right now. We only want the DB context. Let me paste that here. And we scroll down. Where we have Apply Migration, let me copy that. Paste it down here. And I will execute that. Perfect. Now we know the Auth API is responsible for authentication and authorization. So in the pipeline, before authorization, we have to add use authentication. When it comes to adding in the pipeline, authentication must always come before authorization. If you add it after authorization, things might not work. We have the AppDB context here, add the using statement, and perfect. Right now we have only configured the DB context in our project. But in this project we have something special. We have to tell Entity Framework Core that hey, we will be using the .NET Identity and we will be using Entity Framework Core where we have the DB context with the .NET Identity. That is how it will know that okay, I have to use the DB context to create all the identity related tables. Defining that is super simple. On builder.services, we have something called as add identity, and there you can define two things. What is the default user? That is identity user that comes by default. On top of that, you have to define the role. We will be using the default identity role for now. Do not worry about the complexities. I am using whatever is default right now. When we modify things, I will point those out, but right now we are setting up the default identity. On there we have to add the entity framework stores, and we have to define the DB context. That will act as a bridge between Entity Framework Core and .NET Identity. Finally, we will be using add default token providers there. With that, we have configured identity in this API project. But now you might be thinking, what exactly will happen because of this configuration that we added inside the program.cs file? In order to see that, let me open Package Manager console here. And the default project will be Auth API. I will write the command add migration. Well, before I do that, let me show you something else. Where we have the on model creating, let me comment this out for a second and then try to add a migration. Call that add identity tables. The migration here will fail and you will see that error pretty soon. Perfect. You can see the error unable to create a DB context of type identity user login. It requires a primary key to be defined. Now you do not need to go into these complexities. If you want to remove that error, we are not using this method, we can remove that and that error goes away. But if you are seeding some data right here, then all you have to do is add this one line that I said before. Once that line is there, if we try to add the migration again, the migration will be added successfully. Perfect. You can see here it is creating quite a few tables. We have ASP.NET Roles table, ASP.NET Users table with many columns here. We have the Role Claims table, User Claims table, User Logins, and much more. All of these tables are related to the .NET identity. That way we do not have to worry about the heavy lifting. .NET team has provided this out-of-the-box solution that we can use, and that is pretty solid. We have the migration here. We can hit the command update database, but I might see the error message with invariant that is there. Edit the project file, remove this, and if I run that again, we will see one more error message. Perfect. You can see the connection string property has not been initialized. I want you guys to figure out what exactly we are missing. If you said connection string, you are spot on. In the coupon API, let me copy the connection string. We will paste that in the auth API. We forgot that. The database name, I will change that to be auth here. And let me execute update database. It should work this time. Even if you did not run the command update database, if you started the project, it would automatically apply migration based on the code that we have inside program.cs. But you can see the migration has been applied successfully. Let me switch back here, refresh the database. And perfect, we have the mango_auth, and it has quite a few tables related to .NET identity. Now right now in the default implementation of identity, if you examine the ASP.NET Users table, you will notice it has quite a few columns. It has a column for name, it has a column for phone number, and that's about it when it comes to user details. What if you want to capture more details from the user, like name of the user and street address, anything else that you want? How can you configure the .NET identity tables and add more properties on there? The way identity has been designed, it is pretty extensible, so let me do that. We will go back to the project here, and inside the auth API, let me add a folder with the name of models. In there, I will create a new class file, call that application user. Now we want to add more properties to the ASP.NET users. If we examine program.cs, the default user is identity user. So basically we can say that application user will extend the identity user and add the using statement. When we do that, application user will have all the properties of identity user. On top of that, let's say we want to add name of the user. Now when we do that, we have to define the change in the DB context. Let me close all the tabs other than this. Open the DB context of auth API, where we have identity user. This now will be application user. When we were working with the coupon API, we used to create a DB set. So let me do that for application user. And with that, we have to modify the program.cs. When we are adding the identity, the default user now will be application user and not the identity user. With that change, we have added a DB set in the application DB context. So you might be thinking that it might create a new table with the name of application users. But it will not do that. Entity Framework Core is smart. The .NET knows that application user is extending the identity user. Because of that, it will add one more column to the ASP.NET users table. Let me show that. Let me add a new migration here. I will say add name to ASP.NET users. And perfect, you can see here it is adding column name and it is adding that to the ASP.NET users table. If you run the project, we do not have that as the startup project. In the multiple here, let me select Auth API as well and run the project. It should automatically apply migration. Let me go back and perfect. We have the name column right here. So with that, you can see adding new columns to the built-in tables of identity is not that difficult. Now we want to work on the Auth API and we need to create endpoints in the Auth API. We have the default weather forecast controller. Let me delete that. We do not want that, as well as the model. In the controllers folder, I will create a new controller that will be an API empty controller. I will call that Auth controller. Well, let me call that Auth API to be consistent. The route name here, I do not like controller. I will change that to be API/auth. Right now, what will be the two endpoints in this controller? First one will be to register an account and next one will be to log in. Let me create HTTP post there. Give it a name of register and it will be a public async task of action result. Call that register. Right now we can return OK. That is fine. Copy the register. Paste that for login here. And perfect. We have two API endpoints that we added in our controller. Let me set the startup project here to be the Auth API and run that. Perfect. We see both the endpoints. We have the endpoints for our Auth API where we have register and login. We need to think about what will be the DTOs or models that we will need for all of the endpoints. One thing that will be common when it comes to Coupon API is the response DTO. Let me copy the DTO folder here from Coupon API, paste that in models. I will delete the Coupon DTO. We do not want that. Response DTO, we need to make sure to change the namespace to be Auth API. Now with Auth API, we will be working with user. Application user will have many properties that are not needed when we typically work with user. Like if we go to database, you can see application user has lockout enabled, access failed count, concurrency stamp, security stamp. All of those are not needed. In the DTOs of Auth API, let me add a class for user DTO, and in there I will add the critical properties that we care about user. The main four properties here will be user ID, and user ID will be a GUID and not an integer. Because of that, it will be a string. That is the default type for user ID in .NET Identity. Next, we will have email of the user, name of the user that we just added, and there is also a default property for phone number. Then first, we want to think about all the models that are needed when we register a user. At that point, we will require name, email, phone number, and on top of these three, we will also require password that a user wants to set for their account. In the DTO here, let me add a class here. I will name that registration request DTO, and we will copy the three properties. On top of that, I will add password right here. Let me correct the spelling of registration, and that looks good for the registration request. Similarly, when we have to log in, we need a DTO for that as well. I will call that login request DTO, and let me correct the case here for DTO, and the user DTO as well. Perfect. That looks good. Let me go back to the login request DTO. When a user wants to log in, they will typically send username and password. So here we will have two properties. First one will be username. Next one will be a password. If a user is able to log in successfully, we will return a user DTO of the logged in user. On top of that, we will have to return something called as a token. That is the basic security where we return the JWT token to validate that okay, you are logged in and this is your special token that will prove that you are logged in successfully. In the DTO, let me create one more class and I will call that login response DTO. There we want two things. First is the user DTO, and next one will be a string that will be token. Perfect. With that, I believe we have added all the DTOs that are needed for authentication. When we work with authentication, we deal with creating JWT token that is used to validate a user that is logged in. You can see in the login response DTO, we added a string for that token. Now that token is generated with the help of a secret key, and there are a few more settings that you can configure. I will add all of the settings in one place, that is appsettings.json. Here, let me create a new section. I will call that API settings. In there, we will create a section with the name of JWT options. And there we want three key value name. First is the secret key that we will use. And you can make up your secret key. I am adding a placeholder here that this is used to sign in and verify JWT token. Replace it with your own secret. Next thing is an issuer, and this will basically be like who issued this certificate or this token. We can hardcode that to be Mango auth API here. And then we have something called as an audience. Audience will basically be that okay, this token has been generated, but it has been generated for certain audience. And we can give that a name of Mango client. What that will do is if some other audience tries to pass the token, it will treat that token as an invalid token. Now we have added these settings inside the app settings. If you want to access them individually, you can get the configuration object, but there is other way of accessing that in your API. What we can do is in the models here, let me create a new class with the exact name that we have here. That is JWT options. And in that class, we will create three properties with the name of secret, issuer, and audience. We will set all of them by default to be string.empty. Next, what we can do is in program.cs, when we are configuring the pipeline, we can configure that JWT option. All of these properties should be populated with the values from app settings. For that, we will say builder.services.configure, and we want to configure the JWT options. That will be configured by builder.configuration.getSection. Inside there, we need the key name. If we go back to app settings, that is inside API settings. We will add a colon and we have JWT options. That will basically configure the class file, and using dependency injection, we can access the settings that we have right here. Now when the time is right, we will access that, but right now we have configured that in our container. Now we want to add services to our auth API. In auth API, let me create a new folder for that. To organize everything in a better way, we will create service folder, a new folder for iService there, and we will add our first interface in there. That will be iAuth service. Think about what will be the endpoints in this interface. We will have something for login and register. When a user is registering, what will be the return type? That will be user DTO. Let me call the method as register here, and what will we receive as input parameters? That will be the registration request DTO. Let me call that the same here, and that looks good. Now when a user is logging in, the return type, we have that as login response DTO. Method name will be login, and the parameter that we will receive will be login request DTO. Then we need to implement the auth service. In the service folder, we will add a class file, auth service, and it will implement the iAuth service. Let me implement that interface, and perfect. Now you might be wondering that when we register a user, we have to create a record in this table, maybe some other tables related to identity, and the password hash that we have here, we will have to hash the password and do all the complex security. That will not be the case. With .NET Identity, they have given us many helper methods to automatically create the user, secure the password, assign roles if we have to, and much more. To access all of those helper functions that we have with .NET Identity, we will have to inject some things with dependency injection. Now first, when we register or log in a user, we will be updating our database, so we will need the application DB context. So read only, we have the app DB context, call that _DB, and then we want to inject the helper methods. First one here is a user manager. If you write user manager here, we have to define the T-user. We are not using the default user, we are using application user, and I will call that _user manager. When we have to work with the roles in the user, we will be using something called as role manager. That will be a read-only role manager, and you can define the default role. Now we will be using the default roles of the application. So right here, let me write identity role and role manager. I have to inject all three of them with dependency injection. Let me do that here, and we will say _DB, _user manager, and _role manager. These helper methods are injected automatically, and we do not have to do any other configuration. With that injected, now we can implement the register and login functionalities. Let me work on register right here. When we receive the registration request DTO, we get few properties. We need to create a new application user with these properties. So application user, user is equal to new, and there we can assign username, which will be registration request DTO.email. Email will also be the same, and we have something called as normalized email. That is basically email convert that to uppercase. We have the name property, assign that, and we have phone number, assign that as well. Perfect. With that, we have created an application user based on the information that we receive inside the registration request DTO. The register functionality, let me add that inside a try catch block here. Perfect. We will create a variable result, and now we will be using the helper method in user manager. If you write _user manager, there is a helper method with the name of create async. You can see it expects an application user. We have that in the user. And then if you add a comma, there is an overload where it expects a password. That password we have inside registration request DTO dot password. What that will do is it will automatically create the user. It will add entry in the database. If there are any errors, the result will display them. But all of the heavy lifting like hashing the password, everything is done by the .NET identity. What we can do here is we can check if result dot succeeded. Well, I forgot the await keyword here. It is an asynchronous method. So we will have to await that. And then if result dot succeeded, that means the user registration was successful. If the registration was successful, that means we can access application DB context and retrieve the user based on the email. So we can say variable user to return is equal to _DB. We have application users that we added as a DB set. Use that, and we can use first, where we will say u.u goes to username is equal to the request DTO dot email. It will retrieve the user, and based on that user, we can create or rather populate user DTO. Let me do that right here. Once we populate that, we can return the user DTO. Perfect, that looks good. And if there is any exception, we can return a new user DTO without any detail. Perfect. So our register functionality is looking good with our auth service. Right now we are returning the user DTO when the registration is successful. But I think a better approach will be to return a string, and that will be empty if the registration was successful. If it failed, we will return the error message. You can see we have result.succeeded here. So if that was not successful, we can populate that error message. But if everything was successful, we will return empty. In the else part here, we can say return result.errors.first.default because that is a list. And this errors is basically the identity error that has code and description. We will take description that is more meaningful. For some reason, if it catches an exception, we will return error encountered. That looks good. In the auth service, when we register, we will return a string right there. With that, the auth service looks good. In order to consume that, we will do that in the endpoint that we created. Right here, we need two things. First, we need a response DTO, and then we need to inject the auth service. Let me inject the auth service, and let me add the response DTO. In the register here, we will say variable error message is equal to await _auth service dot we have the register. Right here, when we register, we have to pass the registration request DTO that we will receive from body. Let me add that. When we receive that, we will pass that down here. and then we will check if the error message is not null or empty. That means that there is some error that was encountered. Underscore response dot is success. We will set that to be false, and we will set the message to be error message. Finally, we will return a bad request in this case, and we will return underscore response there. Perfect. But if the error message is empty, that means everything was successful. We can directly return back the response. With that configured, let me run the API. Perfect, we have the register endpoint here. Let me try that out. And for dummy purpose, we will use the email string@string.com. Keep the same name, phone number, and password. We will see an error message because password is not strong enough, but we forgot to register the auth service. We have to do that right here. Builder.services.add-scoped and auth service. Implementation is inside auth service. Perfect. Let me try that once again. We will change the email to be string@string.com and execute that. Perfect. We see the error message. Password must have 1 alphanumeric characters. Now with the default .NET identity, they have many validations for password. So let me keep something secure. Admin123*. That should work. Let me execute. And great. We get the message empty and success is set to be true. Let me switch back to the database here. And if I execute this, great. We have created our first user in the ASP.NET users table. That is exciting news. With that, we have the confirmation that our register endpoint is working as expected. If you try to execute that again, we get the error message, username is already taken, and that is perfect. We have registered our first user. Next, what we can do is using the same credentials, we can implement the login functionality. First, we have to do that inside the auth service. Based on the login request DTO, we will get the username and password. We will first retrieve a user from database based on that username. So application users.first.default, and we will say u goes to u.username. Convert that to lower is equal to login request DTO.username.toLower. If that username is valid, then the user will be populated. If a user is populated, then we can check their password. For that, we will have a boolean. Let me call that is valid. And in order to check password, we will be using user manager. We have helper method there with the name of check password async. It is an asynchronous method, so make sure you await that method. There we have to pass the user and their password is inside login request DTO.password. We will check here if user is null or if is valid is false. That means the combination is invalid. In that case, we can return new login response DTO, and inside there we can set user is null and token will also be empty. But if the user was found, we need to generate the JWT token. Before we generate the token, let me populate the user DTO right here, and I will also have the login response DTO. Inside there, we will pass the user object and token. For now, we will keep that empty. but we will generate the token here, and once we generate that, we will assign that token right here. Finally, I will return the login response DTO, and I believe that looks good. With that configured, let me consume that in the auth API controller where we have the login endpoint. We will say variable login response is equal to await underscore auth service dot login. We need to pass the login request DTO. We will get that in the from body here, and we need to pass that model. Then we can check if login response dot user is null. That means the authentication was invalid. I forgot the semicolon there. And if that is invalid, we will set the isSuccess to be false, set the message, and return back a bad request. But if that was successful, we will set the result to be login response and return back an OK. With that, let me run the application and see if that works. We go to login here, try that. Invalid combination. Let me see. Perfect. Let me change that to be string at string.com. Password admin123 *. And great. We get the user back here. That means the login was successful. Now the next thing that we need to work on is when the login is successful, we need to generate something very special, which is a JWT token. Login is working as expected. But now when we log in the auth service, we want to create a token. Now creating a JWT token might seem difficult if you are getting started, but we have helper methods that makes everything super simple. We want to generate a token for the logged in user. Rather than clustering everything in the auth service, let me create a new interface here. We will call that IJWT token generator. The token will be a string, so that will be the return type. Let me call the method name as generate token, and the input to generate that token will be the application user that we will pass right here. Let me create the implementation for that inside service folder. I will create JWT token generator, and that will implement the IJWT token generator. Implement that interface. When we generate token, we will be configuring our token with secret, issuer, and audience. For that, we will require JWT option, and if we examine program.cs, we configured that right here. And because of that, inside the service here, we can retrieve that in constructor using dependency injection. We want to inject the JWT option here. Let me do that. And perfect. That way the underscore JWT option will have all the key values assigned from the app settings. And before we implement the generate token, let me go to program.cs, and I will also register that service builder.services.add-scoped IJWT token generator and its implementation. Great. Now we need to generate token based on the application user. We will do that by using the JWT security token handler. Let me add a new variable for that, and we need to extract the secret key. We will say variable key is equal to, we will have to encode the key, so encoding ASCII2.getBytes, and there we need to pass the secret key that is inside JWT option. We can access the secret key that we stored inside app settings. Now inside token, what we typically have is some claim. Like let's say you want to store the email ID, username, maybe something else in the token. We can store all of them in a key value pair by something known as a claim inside token. So JWT token will be comprised of multiple claims. Let me create variable claims is equal to new list of claim, and that is inside system.security.claim. When we have to add a new claim inside there, we can use a string, like if we want to add with the key name of name, and the value we can go in application user dot name. With that, we have created our first claim in the token. Now this name is fine if you want to use that, but typically there are predefined claim types that we should register. That way it integrates perfectly with the .NET identity. And rather than adding magic string here, we have that inside the JWT registered claim names dot we have email. If you hover, then you can see it is a constant for email. And let me add that with application user dot email. Add a comma there, copy and paste that 2 more times. Next we have something called as sub for subject, and there we typically store the user ID, so application user dot ID. We also have a claim type with the value of name, and that if you hover, you can see they are basic constant here. And inside name, if you want, you can store name of the user, but in the default implementation, they store the username, and we can convert that to string. Now all of them are string, so that we can skip, and I believe with that we have added 3 claims inside the claim list that we have. Let me rename that. Perfect, that looks good. Now we have the secret key, we have the claim list. Final thing that we need is a token descriptor that will describe or that will have some configuration properties for a token. So we can say variable token descriptor is equal to new security token descriptor. There we have to configure multiple properties. Like you can see, we have the audience that we have in the JWT option. We have the key value for audience. Next we have the issuer that also we have configured in JWT option .issuer. This will be issuer and not issued at. Let me fix that. And then all the claims that we have added in the claim list, we have to add that in the token descriptor, and that will go in subject. So subject is equal to new claims identity, and we will pass our claim list inside there. We can set the expiration, and that will be datetime.now. We will add 7 days. Finally, we need sign-in credentials. For that, we will be using the secret key that we added on line 22. Sign-in credentials is equal to new, and we have to generate a new symmetric security key. We will pass our key there. And finally, we need the algorithm. The common standard is security algorithm HMAC SHA 256 signature. That is the default standard, and we will use that. Perfect. With that, we have created a token descriptor that has all the properties that we want. Finally, we need to generate the token. We will say variable token is equal to, we will be using our token handler. There we have a method create token. If you examine, it expects a security token descriptor that we have created and configured right here. So when we have to return back, you can return token back, or you can use the token handler. It has the method write token. When you pass token inside that, it will write that and it will return you the final token that is needed. Our generate token looks great, and we have implemented all the functionality that is needed to generate a JWT token. We have added the method to generate token in the JWT token generator. Let me consume that inside our auth service. we will have to inject the IJWT token generator. We already configured that in the program.cs file. So let me inject here with dependency injection. Where we have the login here, we need to generate the token. We can use the JWT token generator .generate token. We need to pass the application user right there. And let me save that in a variable token. Perfect. Let me add a debugging point here and see what happens. We have an error. Let me see where that is. I forgot a comma there. And let me run the application. We have an error here. Let me see. It is with the JWT token generator. Examine that. And yes, of course. When we are injecting the JWT option, we cannot do that like this because there is no class implementation that we have registered. What we did is we configured the builder.services.configure with the options. If we go back here, when we are injecting, we will rather get an I option. And there we have to pass the JWT options. When we receive the JWT options here, we have to extract the value and assign that to our JWT option. With that, let me restart the application. Perfect, that works here. Let me try to log in. Let me enter my username here and password. And let me see. We hit our breakpoint, and if we examine, perfect. Something here has been generated and it is inside our token variable. Copy that, go back to the browser and open the website jwt.io. If you scroll down, we have the encoded. Remove that and paste your token. On the right hand side, you can examine all the details that got added. You can see it is adding all the claims that we had. It has the user ID, it has the email, we have a valid issuer and audience. You can see here how easy it was to generate a token and adding claims onto our token. If you want to add more claims in the future, that is pretty simple as well. You can directly go to the JWT token generator and add them right here. Right now, what I will do is where we have the API endpoint in auth service, and if the token is successful, when we return back, we need to pass the token that got generated. With that, let me run the application again and try that one more time. Now the response should have a valid token. We hit execute here. And perfect, we get the token right here. We have configured our login and register. On top of that, I want to add one more endpoint when we want to assign role to any user. If I go back to the SQL Server and examine the auth table, you can notice we have ASP.NET roles table, but that is empty. First, we need to create a role in the ASP.NET roles table, and then we have a mapping table ASP.NET user role, where we can pass the user ID and role ID to assign some role to our user. What I mean by role is, let's say there is an admin role and a customer role. Customer can access few things as long as they are logged in, but admin is the only one who is able to, let's say, create a coupon or delete a coupon. And for that, when we register a user, we need to assign role to a user. Let me go back to the application for that, and inside the interface here, we will create one more method that will return a Boolean flag, and I will call that assign role. We will assign a role based on email and let's say the role name. So string role name, whatever role name we pass here, we will assign that to a user with the email address that we provide in the parameter. To implement that, we will go back to the auth service. Let me implement that interface. And if you notice in the dependency, we added role manager that will provide us with the helper method to create a role in our database. But before we do that, we need to retrieve user based on this email. So let me copy this line, paste it here. We will check the email. Let me do that. And perfect. That way we will retrieve any user based on the email. If the user is not null, then we want to proceed further. Before we assign role to a user, we need to make sure that that particular role is created in our database. To check if a role already exists or not, we will say not here underscore role manager. We have a helper method role exists async. Now here we are checking if the role exists or not, and we need to pass the role name. But in the if condition, you can see it will not work because this is an asynchronous method. To make that synchronous, we can call getAwaiter.getResult, and that way we do not have to write the await keyword. Inside the if condition, we need to create role because that does not exist. To create that on role manager, we have the create async, and that expects a new identity role where we need to pass the role name. Let me pass that role name here. I added an extra bracket here, and we will have to add the getAwaiter.getResult. That will create a role if it does not exist, and then we have to assign user to a particular role. We can do that using user manager. We have helper method there, add to role async. Now when you are working with role, remember that you can work with one role or multiple roles. We want to add one role, so we will use add to role async, and that expects the application user and the role name. We will pass both of them, and finally we will return true. If the user is null, we can return false here, and that looks good for the assigned role. With that configured, let me run the application. And we forgot to add the endpoint in the auth API. Let me do that real quick here. Copy the login, paste that one more time. Name, I will call that assigned role. We will assign role when a user will be registered from the front-end application. So let me expect the same DTO, registration, request DTO. Here we have assigned role. We need to pass model.email and the role name. Now we do not have role name inside registration request DTO. Let me add that here, save that, and we will pass model.row, convert that to an uppercase. That way we do not have any casing issues when we are creating role. Let me change the variable name here to assigned role successful. And if that is not successful, we want to display error message here, error encountered. If everything is successful, we return the response back. Let me run the application and see if that works. Let me register a new user right here. And when we are registering, let me give that a role of admin. Now, even though when we are registering, we are not using that, but I still added that right here. Perfect, user is created. If we go back here, ASP.NET users. Great, we have that. Now we need to assign that user a role. Let me copy the DTO that we have here. We are using the same one to assign a role. Paste that here. We only care about email and role, but if anything else is present here, we will ignore that. Let's see what happens. Perfect, the is success is true there. Let me examine the ASP.NET roles table. Great, admin role has been created. If I examine the ASP.NET user roles table, that role is assigned to a user that ends in number 8, and if we examine, that is admin@gmail.com. With that, we are able to assign role to a user successfully. Now you might be thinking that, hey, why did we not combine the assigned role with register functionality? You can do that if you want, but the reason I am keeping things separate is when we will be calling the endpoints from front end, we will register a user with the default role of customer, and then if a user is already logged in as an admin user, only then they will be able to register an admin account. That complexity we will cover in the upcoming videos, but right now the endpoints that we have in Auth API are working as expected. We have the Auth API that is functional, but now we want to consume that from our web project. Let me close all the tabs here, and we will be working on the web project. First, what we need to do is we need all the models in our web project as well, because from there we will be sending in all the requests and getting all the response back. Let me scroll down to the models of Auth API, DTO. I will copy all of them other than the response DTO that we already have in the web project. We need to change the namespace here to be mango.web.models. Let me copy that namespace. I will update all the other ones here. Paste that. Login. Paste that. Perfect. That looks good. Let me build the solution. And perfect. That works. We also have to configure the URL for Auth API. I believe that is 7002. That is correct. Inside the web project, we have utility, static detail. Let me create an Auth API base for the URL. In app settings, I will copy this, paste that again. For the Auth API, that will be 7002. We need to configure that in the program.cs here. Copy and paste that here. It will be for the Auth API base and service URL Auth API. Now we have configured the Auth API base URL and we added all the DTOs that are needed in our web project. Inside our web project, we need to create the auth service similar to the coupon service. Let me add the interface here, new item. That will be iAuth service, and in there we want 3 endpoints. All of them will return the response DTO. The first one, let me call that login async. When we are logging in, we need to pass the login request DTO. Copy and paste that 2 more times. Next we have the register here, and we have the assigned role. In register and assigned role, we will be passing the registration request DTO. Let me do that. Copy that and paste it here. Perfect. The interface looks good. Let me add the service here. Auth service, and that will implement the interface. Let me examine the coupon service. We need the base service using dependency injection. Let me add that here. And let me go back and copy one of the post calls that we have. And I will paste it right here. We need to add the asynchronous keyword. Let me add that. Perfect. Now what will be the endpoint? That is API/auth, and the base will be Auth API base. Data that we have to pass is the registration, request DTO, and perfect, that looks good. But when we have the URL along with auth, this is for assigned role. Let me double check the name that I am using. We have assigned role, add that here, copy this, paste it 2 more times. Next one is the register. We go back, we have register, copy that, paste it here. Let's go back, we have the login. Let me close that and I will pass it right here. We will have the login request DTO. Final thing that we have to do is configure our program.cs in the web project, where we need to add the HTTP client for the auth service. And we need to add the scoped implementation for auth service as well. Perfect, that looks good. With that, if I run the application, well, we need to configure all the 3 projects. Everything should work exactly the same. Right now, we are not calling the API, but we have configured the auth service in our web project. And perfect, the web project should work exactly the same. Next thing that we have to do is add a controller for authentication in the web project, and we have to configure login and registration page. Now we want to build the registration controller in the web project. In controllers in the web project, let me create a new controller. I will have to stop the application there. It will be an MVC controller. Name of that controller will be auth controller. We will be using our auth service for login and registration. Let me inject that with dependency injection. We do not want the index action here. We rather want the login and logout. We do not want the index action here. We rather want an action method for login. And there we will be passing a new login request DTO. When we return back to the view, we can pass that. And let me use the new syntax. Let me copy this and paste that one more time for register. And with that, we have the register view model, or rather, we can just keep that empty. That is okay. We have added the get endpoints for login and register. With that, we have added the endpoints for login and register. Let me go to our nav bar in view underscore layout. And right there after the UL here, let me create one more UL element. We will have a list in there. Give it a class of nav item. And in the first one, we will have the login link. Let me copy the anchor tag, paste it one more time. It will go to the auth controller. We do not have ASP area. Remove that. Action name will be login, and it will be login. Copy that, paste it one more time. That will be for register. Let me do that. Perfect. We want the login and register to be displayed if a user is logged in. With the .NET application, we can directly use the Razor syntax here and check if not. We have a user object that gets populated using the claims of the logged in user. On there, we have a property for identity, and there we have a Boolean flag if the user is authenticated or not. If the user is not authenticated, we will display login and register. In the else part, if a user is already authenticated, we will display them to log out. We have not added this action, but I will add that in the auth controller. Let me add that right here. Log out. And perfect. That looks good. And perfect. With that, we have added 3 action methods in our auth controller. Let me run the application here, and we should see the login and register on the nav bar. We have that, but the designing is off. Let me see. Where we have the UL, we will give class of navbar nav. And perfect. That looks good. If you click on any one of them, we have not added the view, so you will run into error message. Let me work on adding the views in the next video. Let me work on creating views for our endpoint. We only have to create them for login and register. Let me stop the application, add view, empty view. This will be login, and we will create one for register. Let me do that. Perfect. Let me work on the login first. The model here we will receive will be the login request DTO. We will add a form with the method of post. Inside there we will create a div with the class of container, border padding 4, and another div with an h1 for login. Then let me add a div, give it a class of row, text center. We will be displaying all validation. For that we have the ASP validation summary. We want to display all the validation here, and class will be text danger. After that we will add a class of row where we will have the input fields for username and password. We will add a div, give it a class of column 6, offset that by 3, and padding bottom of 2. First input tag that we want will be ASP4 username, and give it a class of form control. Placeholder will be username, and I believe that looks good. Let me copy and paste that one more time. We have the password. Let me paste that one more time here. And for the last one, we need a button. Type will be submit. Class will be form control. And btn success for the green color. Let me give that a value of submit here. And we will display login. I will also add btn class. That looks good. We do not want to waste much time in the designing here. Let me run the application and see if that works. We go back to the login. Perfect. That looks much better. Perfect. That is looking great. I will make one small modification. On the small screen, I will make that column 12, but on the medium or larger, we will add the offset. Let me copy this and paste that. Go back here and it stays the same. That looks good. Let me design the register. Go back and copy this. Paste that in register. And we need the model. Model will be registration request DTO. I will change the H1 here to be register. And we need email here. Let me add that. Placeholder will be email. Copy and paste that 2 more times here. We have the phone number. Well, we should get the name before that. And we have phone number. We have the password. That looks good. Let me add the individual validation for all of them. We can remove this div here. We have email, paste that, name, phone number, and password. We will have the register button here. Save that, and let me go back. Perfect. The view is looking good. Let me add some padding here. Padding 3. Great. With that, our UI is looking great for login and register. Right now, when we are registering a user, we have not defined what is the role of a user. Let me add a drop down here because right now we are still configuring things, but we will remove that later on. I will stop the application. In static details, let me add two constants here for role admin and role customer. I want to retrieve both of them and create a list of select list item. We will call that variable role list is equal to new list of select list item. We want to create the first one, select list item, where text is sd.roleAdmin and value will also be the same. Copy that here. We need the closing bracket. Paste that one more time. Next one will be customer. Let me do that. Perfect. Now we need to pass this role list to our view. We can do that by using viewBag. Let me create a property with the name of role list. That is the key name of the viewBag. If I go back to the register view, I can access that viewBag right here. Let me copy this div, paste it one more time. We will add a select statement where we will have ASP4. We will store that in the role property that we have for our model. And the class name, we will give that form select. That is what we have for dropdown. And the list of all the items that is inside the view bag. Let me copy the key name to avoid any spelling mistake and paste it right here. Within the select here, we will add a default option of select role. Let me run the application and see if the dropdowns are populated. We will go to register and perfect. We have the dropdown. Now in the next video, let me work on the post action method. That way when we are posting here, it actually calls our API. We want to work on the post action method for register. Let me copy this, paste it one more time. When we register, we will be getting a registration request DTO right here. Let me call that obj. And this will be HTTP post action method. When we retrieve this object, we need to invoke the auth service. We will get a response DTO back. So that will be equal to _auth service dot register async, and we need to pass our registration request DTO, add the await keyword, and we will make this asynchronous method. Perfect, that looks good. The response DTO that we will get here will basically create or register our user. Once we register the user, we need to assign the role. Let me call that as a result here, and let me create one more response DTO for the assigned role. We can check here if result is not null, and if result dot is success, that means the registration was successful. We can check here if obj.role, and we can see string.is null or empty. If that is null or empty, then we can assign obj.role is equal to sd.customer. But if the role is populated, we want to create a role whichever is selected from the dropdown. So here we will be using assigned role is equal to await. On auth service, we have assigned role async. We need to pass the obj there, and that will create the role if that does not exist. If it already exists, then it will assign that role to the user. We can add a check here if assigned role is not null, and if assigned role dot is success. We want to display a temp data that registration was successful, and then we want to redirect them to login. So we will say return redirect to action, That will be name of login. Let me do that. Perfect. That looks good. In the else part here, if there are any error, we need to populate the dropdown again. So let me copy this, paste it here, and we can redirect back to the view with the OBJ. Perfect. I believe that looks good. Let me add a debugging point and restart the application. Let me go to the web project here, register. We have a wrong placeholder here. Let me go back to register. This will be password. Let me select the role of admin and hit the register button. We hit our breakpoint. Result, that is successful. Let me see. Role should be populated as admin. Assigned role is also successful. And if we go back, perfect. Registration was successful. Let me register a customer user to see if that works. We will select that role, hit the register button. Perfect. Let me go to database before we move forward. In the ASP.NET roles table, I do not think we have customer, so that should create a new role. Press F5 here. It was successful. If I go back to the database, the new role has been created. With that, we can see the register functionality is working as expected. With that configured, the register functionality is looking good. In the login, we have incorrect placeholder. Let me correct that. And perfect, that looks good. Now let me work on the login functionality. We have the register post. Let me copy that and I will paste it after the login get here. Rename that to be login, and with that we will have the login request DTO. Service will be login async, and we have the response DTO. We do not need to assign any role there. Let me remove that. If that is successful, I want to deserialize that, and we should be getting a login response DTO. Let me remove everything else here. We want a login response DTO. We need to use JSON convert dot deserialize object. That will be of the type login response DTO, and we will have to convert to string the result dot result. And I think the name is not that good here. Let me modify that in just a second. I will call that response DTO and fix that. Perfect. So we will deserialize and see what response we get back when we invoke login async. If we do get that, then we want to redirect them to the index action of the home controller. But in the else part here, we want to display that error message. Now if you notice in login, we have the display summary all. Because of that, we can add a custom error to our model state. Add model error. We will be adding a custom error right here. And the message will be inside response DTO dot message. If that is not valid, we want to return back to the view with the OBJ that we receive. Let me remove everything else here, and I believe that looks good. Let me save this and go back to the application. Let me try something invalid here. Perfect, it is invalid. Let me try the valid password. And great! You can see it redirected me back to the home page. Let me try that once again and add a debugging point. We go back here, examine the login response, and great! The main thing that we care about is token, and we are receiving that right here. When we are logging in, we receive the token. We have to save that somewhere in the application because when we are accessing Coupon or any other API and they request the token, then we have to pass that along. We can store that in multiple places, like you can use a session or a cookie, whatever you prefer. I will be using cookies to store our token. Let me implement a service for that. In our web project where we have the services interface, let me add a new interface and I will call that iTokenProvider. First method here will be a void. I will call that setToken and we have to pass token in the parameter. Next one here will be getToken to retrieve a token, and the last one here will be to clear the token. Let me implement this interface in the services folder, add a class of token provider, and that will implement the iTokenProvider. Let me implement that interface. And when we are working with the cookies, we need to inject the HTTP context accessor. I have already configured that in the startup class file, well, the program.cs not startup right here. So with that, we will inject the HTTP context accessor. And first we need to set the token. On context accessor, we have the HTTP context. On response.cookies, we want to append a cookie, and for that we will have to give a key value pairing. To store the key name, let me do that in static detail. Let me create one more constant. I will call that token cookie, and we will call that JWT token. When we are appending that, we will say st dot token cookie, and the value is inside token. When we have to clear the token, we can call cookie.delete, and we need the key name. Finally, where we have to retrieve the token, let me create a string, and I will create a boolean has token. We will check our context accessor.http context, and this time we will not go to response. We want to request a cookie. So we will say request.cookies. We have try get value. I will pass the token cookie right there. What that will do is if it has a value, it will assign that to has token. When we return back, we can say if has token is true, then we pass the token, else we will pass null. And here, because of the null reference, we will have to explicitly check is true. Perfect. That helper functionality looks good for managing all the token. But before we see that in action, we have to register that in the program.cs. Right here, we will have builder.services.add_scoped. We have the iTokenProvider, token provider. Cut that and paste it with all the services. We have added token provider, but where will we use the token provider that we added? We will do that in the auth controller of the web application when we log in. Before that, let me inject that using dependency injection. So private read only iTokenProvider. We will get the implementation here. And let me inject that. If you scroll down to the login here, we are getting the login response DTO. When we get that back, we can set the token provider using token provider.setToken. We will pass the login response DTO.token. Now with that, if you run the application, let me see what happens. We go back to the application, log in here. and we are redirected back to the application. Let me inspect the element. We will go to application, scroll up here, and we have the cookies. Let me expand that. Perfect. You can see we have a token right here. That means we are logged in. But why does our application does not treat that we are logged in? Because if we go take a look at underscore layout, we need to set something that will say that this user identity is logged in. How can we tell .NET that, hey, our user has actually logged in and this authenticated is true? How do we define that? We can do that in the auth controller. Actually, let me create a new method here. It will be a private async task. Let me call that sign in async. Let me call that sign in user, and we will expect a login request DTO. Call that as a model. Right here, we want to call the HTTP context. There we have a method sign in async, and that is inside Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.Authentication. It is a built-in method, but that expects a claim principal. We have to build that claim principal, and if you examine the other constructor that we have, we can also define the authentication scheme. We are using cookie here, so we can say cookie authentication defaults, and there we have the authentication scheme, which is basically a constant for cookies. And next we need to pass the claims principal. Let me create that here. I will call that principal is equal to new claims principal. And when you do that in the parameter here, you can see we have an option to pass the identity. In that identity, we have to add few claim types. When you add a certain claim types that are registered with the .NET identity, then it will have the authentication checked in. When we were generating the cookies, you remember we had few JWT registered claim names. We will have to do something similar right here. Let me create a new handler here for JWT security token handler, and we will install the NuGet package for that. Let me stop the application here. After that, we will need to read the JWT token. So on handler, we have a method read JWT token, and there we will pass the model.token. I do not see that here because it will be login response DTO and not the request. There we go. That will basically read the token, and from that token, now we want to extract all the claims that we added. Let me create a variable identity that will be new claims identity on the authentication scheme of cookies. Then on identity here, we want to add a claim. What claim do we want to add? Let me open the auth API here, and let me go to services. We have the token generator. There we have these three claims. Copy that, save that, and let me paste it right here. The first one here is the email. Let me move it inside the bracket here, new claim. That will be email. And how do we get that? In the JWT, we have the claims, and there we can use first.default. We will say u goes to u.type is equal to. We need the same constant. Let me paste that right here. When we get that, we will say dot value, and that will extract that particular claim and add that inside our identity. Let me break that in a separate line here. And we are missing a closing bracket. That looks good. Now let me copy this and paste that 2 more times. Next, what we want is sub. Copy that. Add that here. And we want the name claim. Now these are the default claims for email, subject, and name. But when we work with .NET Identity, we have to add 2 more claims. So let me do that. Copy this and let me paste that one more time. Now rather than JWT registered claim, we also have claim types.name. If you hover on that, it has the identity claim for name, and there we have to pass the email. So right here we will pass email, and that way the claim types.name will be populated. Finally, where we have the principal here, we will add identity, and with that all the steps will complete. Well, where we are signing in the user, we need to pass the principal. That will sign in the user using the .NET identity. These are the basic and the default steps that are needed to sign in a user using the built-in .NET identity. Now with that configured, let me go to the sign in method that we have in login. Right here. Before we set the token here, we will call our sign in user and we will pass the obj. Well, not the obj because that is a request. We want the response, that is login response TTO. Perfect. That should sign in the user. With that, let me run the application and show you one error message. Let me try to log in here. And when we hit the login button, we will see an exception. We see no sign-in authentication handlers are registered. Try to Google the error and see if you can figure out what is going on here. I hope you were able to figure out the solution. We are using authentication in our web project, but did we register that in our services or in the pipeline? We have not done that. Because of that, it is giving us a hint here. Did you forget to call the add authentication .add cookies? And we obviously forgot that. We will go to the web project here, program.cs, and on builder.services, we will be calling add authentication. What will be the type? That is cookie authentication defaults .authentication scheme. That is basically a constant for cookies. And on there we will say add cookie and configure few options. I will set few options here, like from hours, we will set that for 10 hours. Login path, if a user is not logged in, then it should redirect to auth controller, login action, and if access denied is found, it will go to an action method of access denied. Now I have not added that page, but you can add that if you want. When we go to our request pipeline, we also have to add app.use authentication, and that will be before authorization. With that configured, let me run the application. Let me go back, try to log in here. And perfect. Now you can see it knows that we are signed in and it is automatically displaying us the logout button. So that is great. But we need to set the functionality of logout. Let me do that real quick. Where we have the logout here, we will say await on HTTP context. Similar to sign in async, we have the sign out async. On top of that, we will have to clear the token. Do not forget to do that. And once we do all of that, let me redirect to action. That will be index action and home controller. We are using await here, so let me add a task. And perfect, that looks good. Let me go back. The hot reload should